Hello there. It's wonderful to be in front of you. My name is Dr. David Fletcher, and I'm gleefully able to share some wonderful ideas that we're going to be starting to refer to as the big three strategies to create a scan-centric practice. And one of the things that I do in my life journey, which is being a chiropractor and the CEO and founder of CLA, is to really speak to audiences like yourself with the intention of really opening up a conversation that's about looking deeper and having a bigger impact in your community. You know, one of the most important concepts that we can come across in building family-based community practices is a simple word, and it's called utilization. I know it sounds very practical and very almost, how should we say, sterile, that word, but utilization is one of the most important concepts that we can start to focus, because the principle of utilization means that there is the use of a product or a service that is making a difference. And we know that within chiropractic, it's the biggest idea that people need to learn about, because one of the things that we'll be focusing on today is really a concept that allows us to look deeper than where we may have been taught, or where our focus may have been in our general practices, which typically is associated with the spine and the function of the spine. But as chiropractors, we have this glorious opportunity to look so much deeper and look at the opportunities of changing lives and not just spines. But to do that, we have to have a focus that is very clearly involving something bigger than how a person is feeling, and most importantly, discuss to them what their opportunities are for staying healthy and utilizing chiropractic as a foundational element in how they should be thinking about themselves and their family's healthcare for the rest of their lives. Now, that's a big stretch, because so often within the chiropractic model of presenting ourselves to the communities, we are these remarkable, I would say, white knights, the ones who are going to charge in and save people from the challenges and problems that they may be experiencing at the moment. And when we get really good at being those saviors of the moment, then we sometimes and most times have the opportunity to go, well, what got you there? Why don't we take the next steps and see if we can support you to make better decisions? And the patients and their families think that's a great idea. And the idea of maintenance or prevention becomes the concept that tends to be the continuing value of chiropractic. But what I really want you to be thinking about is the power that chiropractic actually delivers, and that is beyond the spine, and that is into the central nervous system. So when we use the term scan and scan-centric practice, it's another way of saying we have the ability as chiropractors, especially using technologies that advance the ability of chiropractic to get into this big picture, to scan the nervous system, to look through the spine, to look at the functioning way in which the impact of stress, that stress that could be their daily experience or could be an incidental experience like a trauma, or something that could be an emotional distress that's associated with them, has imprinted a change on their central nervous system. You see, because it's those imprints on their nervous system which create habits, and it's those habits which so often linger and fester within a person's spine and nervous system that eventually become that moment in time that they seek a chiropractor. And so our joy in putting together a program like we are today is to try and inspire you, but teach you that you have so many of the attributes that all your community is searching for. So we're going to be using terms as we go through today, things like the 4G practice. And what do we mean by that? Well, a generational practice, a 4-generational practice, in fact. You see, those are the type of broad thinking perspectives that a scan-centric practice can look like and can feel like. But to get there, we need to discuss the 3 critical strategies that are going to make a difference, not only in how you think, but how you deliver the care and the services that you know are so critically important. So why don't we dive in and take a moment and start to think about what it is that we're doing and how we can make it even bigger and better, especially when we start to use technologies that were designed specifically for chiropractors so that the entire team can get involved in it. We don't expect just the clinician to use the data We want to use this data that allows them to have a clinical experience, a reporting experience, a care planning experience, and an invitational experience to grow your practice. So the years that we've spent developing what is known as the INSiGHT scanning systems are so much embedded in the culture of chiropractic that the word scan now represents what we started 30 years ago, which was the idea of an INSiGHT subluxation station scanning the nervous system and spine. Now we generally talk about a scan within chiropractic as involving just that. So why don't we take a moment and begin this journey by looking at what scanning is today. If you take a look over on the left-hand side, where I'm running my cursor over here, you can start to see that there is a thermal scanner that is now a fourth generation scanner. And augmenting that, and we'll talk more about it, is what is known as the neuropulse. And the neuropulse is a way in which we can assess the autonomic balance and activity through the mechanisms of heart rate variability. It's the clinical jewel within this set because it is the research darling, if you will, within chiropractic, because we get a chance to look at how the entire nervous system is under stress or under adjustment. And finally, one of the most stable and one of the most interesting data sets that we collect is through what is known as the neurocore. And the neurocore is in the front picture here, and it allows us to scan using surface electromyography. So all of this may be new to you and you're going, what the heck is all of this all about? But you must understand that we created a system where we could look at three different dimensions within the functioning nervous system. And then behind all these instruments, you can see that we can report them in vivid colors and in the ability to create an entirely new experience for a patient so that they are thinking about their function instead of only how they are feeling. And this is something that we've been refining for years and years and years. And so when we start to talk to groups that embrace the idea of building a team community, of taking on the responsibilities in a chiropractic office, and we start to talk to the clinician, the doctor who is doing the scanning and talking about the interpretation, and we start to look into how that attracts patient and how the retention builds, it becomes the hub of your practice as you start to think about growing the scan-centric practice. So that's a bit of a longer introduction, but I want you to focus really about how we can start to begin to leverage all of that intuitive energy we've put into the system so you can build the confidence, the certainty, but most importantly, the greatest practice on the planet right in your community. And so we do have some DNA, I would say, of 10,000, no, probably closer to 15,000 chiropractic offices built into every function that occurs within this scanning system. So we have listened, we have built, we have redesigned so that what you're working with right now in a scan-centric practice is the epitome of the way that technology is supposed to work in the favor of both the patient and yourself. It's pretty exciting stuff that we get to share in this moment. Strategy number one of the first of the big three strategies. It's really simple, but it's really important that I get this point across. It's make the invisible visible. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, if I was to hold up my three fingers like this, and we put them sideways, and we started to see that these three fingers represented the layers of the spine and the nervous system that we palpate with our hands, that we look and see for joint motion, and that we wonder what's going on down below. Let me describe what a patient might hear if we were to describe the spinal core in this manner. On the top are the muscles that allow the movement of the spine, but below that are the joints of the spine that give us the support and allow our spine and our body to support and move itself. When stress and tension in your life starts to tighten the muscles and affect the spinal motion, invariably you're going to feel back and joint pain. But our greatest concern as chiropractors is whether or not that same tension that you feel is changing the function down in the deepest or third layer, and that is your central nervous system. This is the central nervous system that connects the brain to the body in every function, every thought, every feeling, every action, every emotion. every part of the regulation of your health is affected by what goes on in the deepest layer. And to understand what's going on there, we have to make the invisible visible. You see, patients can't see nerve interference. They perhaps and rarely feel functional nerve interference until it becomes a disaster in their health. And what we have when we look deeper and get into the scanning system is the ability to track the neurofunctional electrical signals and check for their symmetry and check for their amplitude and check for the habits that have been started and are embedded within the way that the nervous system performs. You see, we are designed to live in what we would describe as a stressful creative world. Creativity is designed to stress the dickens out of us, challenging ourselves in fitness, challenging ourselves in sport, challenging ourselves in the performing arts, challenging ourselves in the way that our bodies and our minds are functioning together is exactly supposed to be our human experience. Did you notice that I said we're supposed to stress? And one of the great stress researchers, whose name was Hanselje, described that positive stress as what was called eustress, EU stress. But he contrasted that with what wasn't a proper approach, and that was what was called distress. And you see, even though we can survive distress, it leaves a stain on our nervous system. And that's exactly what INSiGHT scanning allows us to do. It allows us to look into that third layer and look and see if our function has started to change. And that's what we can do with heart rate variability. And that's what we can do with thermography. And that's what we can do with EMG, which were designed specifically for how a chiropractor can evaluate this function in the spinal nervous system and the global function of their overall autonomic systems. You see, we know about these things ourselves from reading the textbooks and understanding the impact of it, but we have to make that visible. And that's exactly what we've done, is create reports, but images within the reports that allow us to stay on focus and allow us to stay very clearly in charge of the conversation that we're building with our clients. You can see on the screen that we presented on here that they are vivid in their color and they catch their attention. It's terrifying so often for patients to look at x-rays alone and not understand that they're really looking at a spine that's degenerated, or they're looking at those gas bubbles that they think are cancerous, and they start to get themselves involved in the fear-based concept of being reported to. What we allow ourselves with INSiGHT scanning is to build a beautiful picture for people to say, this is where we want you to understand that beneath those surfaces that you might feel and beneath and into the controls are the mechanisms of the nervous system that regulate everything, from the way that your body is designed to set up in terms of posture and management to the way that the organs and glands and the temperature within your body are being regulated. And that's why it's so wonderful to work and stay engaged with our patients, because they're as excited as you are to not only see their problems be resolved or feel their problems be resolved, but now they can trust and stay engaged for as long as it takes for them to reorganize and rebuild the control within their central nervous system. And that, of course, is why care planning is one of the most obvious ways in which you can utilize the scanning, which means that you have objective data. You have the most powerful data that you can imagine. No more guesswork is involved when you make the invisible visible. You are literally bringing out their dedicated control mechanisms within their nervous system directly in front of them. And here's what's really exciting, is these are class 2 medical devices, which means that these are designed through a diagnostic regimen to be really the top grade of anything that we're looking at. They're highly regulated in different countries, and they're highly regulated by the FDA. And as a consequence of that, it brings you, the clinician, the confidence to know that you are getting signals and data that are referenced and are available to be reproducible. In fact, the data is so reproducible that, as I said before, it's the darling within the research community. So one of the things that we know is that this strategy of making the invisible visible really opens up the excitement and the opportunity for these patients to begin their journey, not only for themselves, but you can start to imagine that a parent wondering if their child is under some deep nerve interference should be scanned and should be evaluated. In fact, most of our clients who engage scanning for their patients that come in have an automatic referral program for their families for similarly to get a well child checkup. We don't have to be looking at pathology, which is the perfect segue for us to go into strategy number 2, which is think possibility versus pathology. Now, one of the things that we need to do is we need to make this critical shift, as we said. We've made an early critical shift, which is to say we want you as the clinician to begin to start to think away from a spine first approach to look at a nerve first approach. But now we have to start thinking about what's involved if we were to release that tension and rebuild the controls in there. That's possibility. And we have to take that away from discussing with our patients the idea of the sickness and the models of illness that is really a medical model, unlike a chiropractic model, which is all full of hope and the possibilities of exploring and expressing your potential. And that's how we built this system. But we know that it's so often, we refer to it as the drowning person syndrome. You know, we walk into an examination room or into an adjusting space with these incredible intentions, right? And that is that we're going to change the lives with today's, conversation or visit. And so often the patient is wanting you to hear their dire needs. And they talk so much about the pathology that they experience, how they've lost this and how there's pain here and how there's symptomatology that's ruined their lives. And they're really focused on that problem, if you will, that's there. And possibility for them is really limited to saying, make me feel better, help me feel better. And so often we refer to that, as I began to say, as the drowning person syndrome, because as you know, probably the most dangerous experience that you as any human can get involved in is trying to save a drowning person, because they are going to try and save themselves at your expense. And so what we really want to do is develop some control mechanisms so that you don't come and fall off point when you are introducing this idea of possibility versus pathology. And so we created a very simple dialogue for you to organize your thinking around exactly what we want you to focus on chiropractically. And we made it so simple, we created an acronym called RED. And R stands for resiliency and reserve. E stands for energy and exhaustion. And D stands for depth. And we're going to use the term dysautonomia because that's what happens when we get a change deep within the central nervous system. So one of the things that's critically important is understanding that if we focus on this RED system of analysis and communication, it gives us a framework to stay in that critical shift model and not let that drowning person talk you out of where you want to go with it. So scanning gives you these objective examination data sets so that you can report your findings. Well, when we started to build the principle of RED and build the technologies that represent that, and I'm not sure which came first, if we built the technologies to find the associated subluxation and then build the RED, it doesn't matter, because RED is the logical progression that's designed to keep you focused with the subluxation and the ability of you to analyze and adjust people to their greatest potential. So let me discuss what heart rate variability is very briefly, and let me tell you why, as I mentioned earlier, that it is truly the game changer, the magical darling, if you will, within neurofunctional testing. We all know that HRV on a wearable instrument on your arm is taking over the world. People have Whoop, people have Oura rings, and I want you to know that as early as 2003, CLA introduced the heart rate variability model and pioneered that within the chiropractic profession. And one of the things that we did was we were able to create not only a good idea come to life, but we were actually able to do some early research that showed us that when people are well adjusted, they have two things that happen. Is that their autonomic activity creates a greater reserve, which means that they have more resiliency to, or horsepower, if you want to say that, within their autonomic nervous system to go from that distress that I talked about earlier to managing towards positive stress. That's a huge thing. It means that you can recover more effectively. And do you want to know why that's so important? Is that the world is fascinated right now with what we as chiropractors have known all along. And that is that if we can clear out the regional distress that we refer to as vertebral subluxations, that vagal tone begins to restore the control mechanisms in virtually every functional system within the body. You see, when we start to analyze the interbeat intervals between heartbeats and use very complex math to understand whether somebody is locked in a sympathetic fight flight state or they have lost their engagement abilities of the parasympathetics, we can start to track their improvement. And tracking their improvement, like we said before, makes the invisible visible. But what it really does is it gives you, the clinician, the incredible confidence to know without a doubt that the care plan that you've set up, that the ability that you have to make a person come alive under your hands is actually happening. No longer do you have to guess whether or not they're responding to your care, that changeability is involved, or that trends are moving in the right direction. You have objective data that's talking to you and teaching you every step of the way. And you see, we begin by doing just a simple 3-minute test, which collects anywhere from about 150 to 200 beats. And we analyze those beats like no one else can because we're looking at it through a chiropractic window. And we analyze that knowing and testing to make sure they are at very calm states without being aroused or anxious. So we know we can replicate that data and manage this so effectively that we can track the care that we're recommending and make even stronger and better recommendations. And we'll talk about that in the reporting as we go down a little further. But we know that chiropractic is of the spine. In other words, a vertebral subluxation is what we are so skilled at analyzing and managing. And to understand what we have to do to live and function within a gravitational world, and we're never getting away from it, we have to understand how adaptive change has begun to alter the way that a spine either aligns or functions in a way in which it can support itself. So postural energy needs to be analyzed to understand if we are wasting that energy to fight all of these misalignments and to fight all of these compensations. Give me 1 second and let me just walk those two technologies together for you. Just imagine that we've lost our ability to cope, and we start to have this progressive amount of stress and distress within our nervous system. And we're still alive and we're still functioning, and we probably don't feel anything other than we're aware that we're just not the person we want to be. And that is what the heart rate variability and the neuropulse are detecting. And gradually, as we start to embed those poor adaptations into our body, we begin to get this going on. We begin to start protecting ourselves in our posture. And that's where we begin to start to see misalignments occurring. And we can measure that. But one of the most important things that we can measure is the change that a chiropractic care plan can do on children, on adults, on seniors, on great-grandparents. Everyone needs to have an analysis done by a neuropulse and a neurocore to see how this distressful situation is indeed affecting the way that their spine is functioning and the way that their nervous system is beginning to reorganize or disorganize. But wouldn't you want to know one more thing? Wouldn't you want to know if there was this deepening change within the way that the internal body could regulate itself? You see, it's one thing for the spine to change, and it's one thing for the body to react to stress, but is it creating a deeper challenge within the organs and glands in the control mechanisms from the spinal nerve? Notice I didn't say from the nervous system, but from the spinal nerve out into those control mechanisms that regulate the body's ability to coordinate function through the organs and glands. It is well known that the ability to regulate the thermal control along the skin, which is, by the way, a sympathetic motor mechanism, is easy to analyze and deduce whether or not that is creating patterns within that regulatory nervous system. Now, I could go into the neurology of the way that we get preganglionic and postganglionic reactions and recurrent meningeal nerves and whatever else, but let me sum it up in one word: patterns. The neurothermal checks for patterns. And if there are deeply embedded patterns in that third layer, the one that's controlling everything within our body, then we can track that to see that those are changing. You see, when we build together the R, the E, and the D, we have a three-dimensional way in which we know that we're developing all of that, which brings us up to that third strategy, which says, now it's time to report to the patient, and never bring in a scare care approach, but bring in an aware care approach, which allows us to give them their neurological report card. And you see, this neurological report card is refined so that it doesn't do what I just did to you, which is talk for 30 minutes and get you inspired. It's designed to bring it succinctly and directly in front of them, and not to give them a sense of fear, but to give them a number. So we worked with data scientists, and we took these three diverse data sets from the heart rate variability, from the EMG, and from the thermography, and we were able to understand that there was this coherence, or this data set, that we could create a single number score. Based on a percentage, we could look at the efficiency under which that person's nervous system is operating. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. We certainly know that subluxations interrupt the way that a nervous system should perform. But now it's our opportunity to put a score on that and tell people how they are efficiently working. Would you like to be operating at a 50 or 60% efficiency in your nervous system? Believe me, you would not. So when we get a chance to build a report card, it gives us not only the ability to have that conversation on the first time that they're in there, but we've built with our engineers the ability to understand in an intuitive way what the data is telling us, so that we can create a sequence of reports, which we refer to as the core score sequence. And the core score sequence begins with what you see here is the initial, but what it really is doing is it's building a dialogue between their neurofunctional data, and it's allowing them to see what their progress is. So in this case, you're looking at a progress report, which is step 2 in a 4-part sequence within this reporting system. And the core score actually takes the data from what we have scored and what we have gathered, not only on the first scan, but now on the second scan. And it builds a comparative dialogue, which allows us to begin to look at whether or not the person has their change that they were searching for, or the change that we're searching for. And you know what that does for you as the clinician and the team members? It removes you from having to answer the question, or it removes you from having to ask the question, how are you? Because now you have exactly what it takes, which is the ability to say, I understand that your nervous system is changing. How wonderful. Now we can track your patterns and focus our intention so that by the time we get the third scan, we'll understand if we're developing better habits, breaking old ones within your nervous system, and starting to get you on track so that you are in control of your health by yourself. In fact, we're going to move you into what we refer to as your second phase of care, which is the rebuilding and the reorganization stage. And it allows you to take these conversations and build a care plan that is defensible, that is based on objective data, that is full of inspiration, and moves them from pathology thinking towards possibility thinking. How exciting can that be? So one of the things that we know is that this stuff works. And one of the ways that we really focus on what works is that we can look at the data and the ability of our advancing practices. And we install these systems in 28 different countries now. And as a consequence of that, we have data from all around the world, allowing us to see the utilization of the chiropractic model we have. And I want to share with you that once we started to get the data from a world scale like this, we started to see that those who took a scanning role within their community started to see two things happen. Number one, that the patients that were under care started to stay longer. In other words, retention wasn't about worrying if they were going to have their problem come back again. It was more about what can you do to fine-tune my nervous system so I can have a fabulous life. And the second thing that happened is they started to refer. So retention and referral are those two parameters that we keep a very close eye on on those 28 countries feeding us the data. We would call those our KPI. Because if you remember, the very first words that I started to use in our conversation today was the word utilization. What matters to myself, what matters in our core values in what drives CLA is that chiropractic break out of this confined shell that it has been under and grow into the world's #1 source of information and change in a proper and drug-free existence. And I don't know if we'll ever get there as the #1, but we want to challenge and be disruptors for how people think their health should be managed. And so I can't wait to tell you that the leading edge of what we've started here is exactly what you can jump into. I get pretty excited because stage part 3, if you will, of the reporting process means that we can compare and look at those trends. But here's the most exciting part is that it never ends. Meaning that we have a 4th stage, which is called continuation, which means that we're constantly having core score analysis against the previous original scans as well as the last 3 that are in there. So there is a continual conversation that is being built using the data in a visual way so the invisible becomes visible and so that we can start to invite people in, as we said, to that idea of retention and referral. And by the way, did you know what the third part of those 3 R's are that we focus on our KPIs? ROI. Because the moment that we start to see that the investiture of you putting your energy into building a scan-centric practice is that it starts to pay off. It starts to pay off in your free time because this goes much faster than you can ever believe. It starts to mean that you get a higher income and a higher revenue stream that allows you to have the ability to be more of an influence within your community. But more importantly, are you aware of the distinction between what we know of ROI, which is the return on investment, or COI, which is the cost of inaction? You see, if you are building this great dream of yours, which we're going to call a family practice, a community-based juggernaut, then if you start to realize that you can start to scan newborns to super seniors, that a 4-generational model is your choice to build, that you don't have to talk about their pain or about how their systems are in trouble. You can start to talk about the possibilities of adjusting the nervous system. Then the cost of inaction means that you're delaying this ability to challenge yourself and challenge the community to see the bigness of your vision. So don't waste time and don't worry about the ROI. The ROI is built into it. All you need to do is start making decisions. And that's one of the great things. And this isn't about selling you, it's about telling you. This is something that we do each and every day in hundreds and hundreds of leads that are coming into our service and into our company, because people are so invested in building the right practice these days, the one that is based on the ethics and the morals of a chiropractic philosophy and uses today's technologies, but never, ever drifts from the process of understanding the philosophy that got us there. So what I want to do is just recap the 3 strategies. Remember, #1, it's incredibly powerful to make the invisible visible. It's up to us to keep focused on the possibility versus pathology and then utilize today's technologies like a neurological report card, like the core score and the core score sequences, to do the heavy lifting for you. After that, it's a slam dunk to recommend care because they know that you are being tracked. You use the QR code that's in front of you. And what I'd love you to do is use it to open up that possibility for yourself. We have amazing people. We have amazing resources. We have so much information on our website. But what would we like you to do is, if you feel compelled to look deeper into what your practice is doing and look deeper into how you want to deliver chiropractic care, then by all means, click through that. It might be that you get some information and that you get further case studies that we've developed. It might be that you meet some new people, in our core funnel. It might be that you start to have the idea that maybe I'd like to look at getting a demonstration of what it is that we're offering. Maybe it's an ebook that you need. Anyhow, if you were to use the QR code, it's going to take you on a journey that I guarantee you will be more inspiring than you thought. Have a great day.